I'm going to talk all about fasting and specifically how to achieve maximum weight loss. I'm talking about rapid, quick weight loss. I'm talking about up to 30 pounds of pure fat in less than the next 40 days. I'm going to give you the top ways to achieve maximum fat loss with a powerful tool called intermittent fasting. Let's get into some fasting facts. Fasting is not about eating less. Fasting is about eating less often, going a period of time where you're letting your body do its healing, okay? Our job is to remove the interference. Once we remove the interference, the body's gonna heal itself. So fasting allows that interference to be removed and it lets your body do what it wants to do, which is to heal itself, which is to thrive. Our creator, Mother Nature, God, the universe, love, whatever you believe in, we were designed to thrive, not to just survive and get by and be sick all the time. We were designed to make an impact. So when you fast, you are going back to that root. Fasting, I know it's popular, it's the #1 search term on Dr. Google, but I want to get one thing straight. It is not a health fad, it is a health fact. It's been around since the dawn of humankind. The reason we exist today is because of the wonderful processes that occur in the human body when we are fasted. You see, our ancestors, they were forced into fasting. They were forced into keto. They didn't have the luxury like we do of having all these grocery stores and Amazon and Whole Foods and Publix abundant all over the place. And here's another thing, a cool fact. #1, 3 of the biggest influencers in the history of this world. You have Jesus Christ, you have the Prophet Muhammad, and you have Buddha. They did not agree on a lot of things, but they did agree on one thing. Can you guess what it was? The power of fasting. In fact, the word fasting is the #1 most mentioned word in the Bible. Did you know that? Every religion practices some form of fasting. So it's not a trend, it's not a fad, it has been around since the dawn of humankind. Fasting is not a diet, it is a tool. It is a powerful tool. The same way a chainsaw is a powerful tool that can get the job done, a chainsaw is also a powerful tool that could hurt you if you don't know what you're doing. That's why this video is so important, especially if you are considering doing some intermittent fasting because it's the new year and you have a resolution to lose weight. I get it, and fasting will help you do it. You need to know how to use that tool, okay? So I'm gonna show you the most powerful way to use it if weight loss is your #1 goal. Speaking of which, stop trying to lose weight. Start reducing cellular inflammation. What the heck do I mean by that? Cellular. Cells. We are made up of trillions of cells. The human body, every second, is tearing down cells, and every second is building up new cells, okay? If you want to go upstream to the root cause of why you can't lose weight, or why you have fatigue, or why you have whatever symptom you're dealing with, it starts with the cell. As my mentor, Dr. Dan Pompa, always tells me, if you want to get well, you have to heal the cell, okay? And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. We're made up of trillions of these bad boys right here, right? This is our cell. Outside of our cells, we have the cell membrane, okay? It's a lipid bilayer. It's made up of mostly fat and cholesterol and then protein. That's why our body loves the keto diet. That's why our body loves healthy fats, because we're giving it what it wants. And in our cell, we have our DNA, right? These are the genes we were born with. And then we also have ATP. This is our energy. This is what gives us life. Without ATP, the cell will not be able to exist. We would not exist without ATP. It stands for adenosine triphosphate, if you remember in your science class. This gives us energy. Look, a healthy cell receives hormones. I'm going to give you an example of thyroid. Excuse my bad handwriting here. And leptin. These are 2 very powerful fat-burning hormones. In fact, every cell has a receptor site for the thyroid hormone. We have over 600 hormones in the human body, and hormones are the language of the human body. They're always sending signals to the cells, and when they send a signal to the cell does its job. So the thyroid hormone will send a signal to burn fat. That's what we want to do, right? To increase energy, which is ATP. We get more ATP. This is good stuff. We get a whole bunch of these ATP units in our cells. We want that. Leptin, same thing, burn fat. I mean, I could go on and on with all these hormones, right? Now, what happens is somebody is a sugar burner, meaning they're eating every 2 to 3 hours. They don't practice intermittent fasting. They've been doing this for years. Now, the cell does not like sugar as its primary source of fuel. So what happens when you're a sugar burner, when you're not fasting, your cell membrane becomes inflamed, right? Remember I talked about cellular inflammation? When your cell membrane is inflamed, here's what happens. Your thyroid's still sending the signal. So giving yourself more hormones like bioidentical hormones, it's not gonna get to the cause. It's not gonna get to this. It's still sending the signal, but the inflammation has now blunted the receptor sites. Think of the receptor sites as like the cell phone antennas, and think of it as it being destroyed. And even though you're sending the signal from your cell phone, that antenna is destroyed, so the signal is not being received. Then you don't burn fat, then you don't have energy, and then it creates a lot of toxic smoke in the cell, and the cell dies. Here's another thing that happens. When your cells are inflamed, the cell membrane actually sends a signal to your DNA. Okay, so your genes are what you were born with. You can't change your genes. Those deck of cards you were dealt with, that's a fact. However, you could change the expression of the genes. In fact, you have about 98% control over the expression of your genes. You have much more control over your destiny than you think. This right here, I'm talking about the reversal of destiny, okay? When your cells are inflamed, it actually sends a signal to your DNA to trigger the bad genes. Maybe you have an obesity gene, maybe you have a diabetes gene, maybe you have a cancer gene. Look, we all have these genes. It's a matter of triggering it. An inflamed cell membrane triggers it. That's when symptoms happen, right? Symptoms are not the problem. Symptoms are weight gain, we have fatigue, right? Write down some symptoms. I'm gonna read them out loud here. So we have weight gain, fatigue, we have sleep issues, yep. I mean, this list goes on and on and on. The symptoms are not the problem. If you go to a regular conventional doctor, they're gonna treat these symptoms. That's like playing a whack-a-mole game. Have you ever seen that whack-a-mole game where you whack the mole and you're like, yes, I got that thing. And then another mole pops up, and then you whack that mole and you're like, yes, I got that thing. And then another one pops up. That's what happens when you chase symptoms, okay? So if you're trying to lose weight, which is a symptom, you're setting yourself up for failure, number one. So when I have a client, or if I'm talking to the members of my Keto Camp Inner Circle, which by the way, you could go to ketocampinnercircle.com, camp with the K, to learn more. I'm talking about focusing on inflammation in the cell. Once you reduce inflammation in the cell with fasting, I'm going to talk about it, that's going to alleviate the inflammation, and then you're going to be able to burn fat. That's a side effect. You're going to have more energy. That's a side effect. You're going to have better skin. That's a side effect of getting to the root cause. Now, intermittent fasting is a very powerful ancient healing strategy to bring down cellular inflammation. That's why it's so powerful if you're trying to lose weight, because we're focusing on cellular inflammation, and a side effect is losing weight. There's only two states the human body could be in. Only two sources of fuel that this cell could live on. Either you are eating every few hours and you're spiking insulin. You might have heard of insulin. Maybe you have a type 2 diabetic friend or a type 1 diabetic friend who takes insulin because it helps them stay alive in terms of type 1 diabetic. When you eat, you spike insulin, or I should say you spike blood sugar. And insulin takes the sugar out of the blood, puts it into your cells. It's a beautiful process. Insulin is not the bad guy. But that is a fat storage hormone. So whenever you're eating, you're spiking insulin. I don't care if it's the healthiest snack in the world. Here's a crazy stat for you. The average American eats 17 to 21 times per day. That is insane. I'm not saying they're sitting down at a table and eating a meal 17 to 21 times per day. I'm saying that they're taking a sip of that kombucha. They're eating a little bit of that granola yogurt. They're taking a bite of that protein bar. They're spiking their insulin 17 to 21 times per day. They are in this constant fed state, and they're wondering, why can't I lose weight? Why do I have this fat around my belly, around my love handles? Even if you're eating the healthiest snacks, this is what's happening, okay? Let's say you do some intermittent fasting. At the end of this video, I'm gonna show you how to practice intermittent fasting for weight loss. Let's say you practice it. Well, insulin goes down and then you start burning fat for fuel. Our cells, which I told you is made up of half fat and protein, saturated fat and cholesterol, it loves fat and it thrives off of fat. That's when you start getting rid of all your symptoms. All your symptoms go away and you feel like a rock star. Here's what happens when you start intermittent fasting. When you fast, your body is literally pumping you full of energy. Okay, I'm fasted right now. I'm pumped up. I'm sorry if I'm screaming at you. Look, a study shows a 10% increase in your metabolism after fasting for 4 days. I'm gonna put the study in the notes below so you can read that study. You might ask why. I thought if I didn't eat a meal, if I skipped a meal, or if I fast 4 days, I'm gonna go into this mythical starvation mode. That is a myth that has been passed around by many, many people and accepted as truth. There is no science to back that up. In fact, science shows the opposite. It shows an increase in your metabolism. And I'm gonna explain to you why. Because when you are fasting, I mentioned insulin is down. You are not spiking insulin. When insulin is down, you have something called counter-regulatory hormones. These all go up, right? Cortisol. Cortisol is your fight or flight hormone. It gives you energy in the morning. If you're out in the sun, it's giving you cortisol stimulation. Cortisol is a good guy. It helps give you energy to fight that lion back in the day. Now it gives you energy to get through the day and crush your day. What else is spiked? Human growth hormone. Look, I put a star here because human growth hormone is the most powerful fat-burning hormone that we have in the human body. It is fat-burning, it is muscle-preserving, it is anti-aging. Look, there are celebrities and there are athletes and there are singers that pay their doctor thousands of dollars every single month to get human growth hormone injected in them because it helps them perform better and look better. Look, there's side effects when you're getting it injected. When you fast, you get all that human growth hormone and you don't have to pay anything and you don't have to worry about any of the consequences. In fact, there's a study that showed a 2,000% increase in human growth hormone after a 24-hour fast in males and a 1,300% increase in human growth hormone after a 24-hour fast in females. Okay, your body is actually giving you energy. I'm gonna explain why it's doing that. Your sympathetic nervous system, okay, you have your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. Then you have your sympathetic nervous system, which is your go get shit done. You have norepinephrine and you have glucagon. Look, these are all fat-burning hormones. Think about it. Why is the body pumping you full of energy when you're fasting? Because it thinks, oh crap, it's been 16 hours and I have this body has not had any food. So even though we could just go to our kitchen or go to Whole Foods supermarket down the street and break the fast and we have food available to us all the time. I mean, we have Uber Eats. We could just click a button and have it at our door in 20 minutes. The human body doesn't know about Uber Eats. The human body doesn't know about your freaking grocery store down the street. The human body is hardwired for the old school, okay? It thinks that it needs to keep you alive to go out there in the wild so you have enough energy, enough focus to find your next meal, to hunt your next meal, to kill your next meal and bring it back home to feast on. That's why the body is pumping you full of energy. This is a huge, important point right here because I'm not talking about cutting calories. By default, when you do intermittent fasting, you are going to end up eating less calories. It's true. But we're not talking about eating small portion meals throughout the day. When you do that, you don't get the benefit of counter-regulatory hormones. I'll give you an example of somebody who's cutting calories. By the way, cutting calories is a huge distraction to what really matters. The human body is not a calculator. The human body is not a bank account. The human body is not a math equation. The human body is a complex chemistry lab, okay? You can't outsmart Mother Nature. Cutting calories is a distraction to what matters, which is the cell and the cell membrane. Somebody who is eating 2,000 calories a day and they go to their nutritionist or they go to their personal trainer and their personal trainer says, oh, you're eating 2,000 calories a day, and they do their basal metabolic rate and you're burning 2,000 calories a day. So we need to create a deficit. Okay, this is a common approach that sets you up for failure. So the trainer or the nutritionist tells that person, hey Henry, we have you eating 2,000 calories a day, you're burning 2,000 calories a day, so you've plateaued with your weight loss. And I know you want to lose 20 pounds, Henry, so I'm going to have you cut your calories from 2,000 to 1,500 calories every single day. So it creates a 500 calorie deficit. When Henry reaches a 3,500 calorie deficit, that's 1 pound of fat, right? We're getting science here. And Henry starts to do this. Henry's very disciplined. He's actually exercising more, eating less, exercising more, eating less. Then what happens? He loses weight and he feels good. And he says Ben's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Then what happens at the 3-month mark or the 4-month mark? He's gaining all that weight back. He's still cutting calories. He's even exercising more. And he just can't seem to lose the weight anymore. In fact, he's gaining more weight and he's irritable and he's cold all the time. What happened to Henry? Henry wrecked his metabolism. Henry wrecked his thyroid. Look, you can't outsmart Mother Nature. You don't get the benefits of counter-regulatory hormones when you're cutting calories and eating your meals throughout the day. I don't care if they're portion control. That is the worst thing you could do for your health. However, when you're fasting, you're counting calories, but it doesn't slow down your metabolism. It doesn't wreck your thyroid because of this process right here. That is the difference between cutting calories and fasting and cutting calories and eating your small meals throughout the day. Okay, now what's the best way to practice intermittent fasting for weight loss? This is my favorite method. So this is based off of a 7-day week, right? 2 days, you're gonna practice 24-hour water fast. That means you're just gonna have water and a little bit of some sea salt for 24 hours. That can mean dinner to dinner. You had dinner at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, and then you don't eat anything until 8 p.m. Wednesday night. Just having water and some salt. During that whole time, your body is tapping into your body fat, it's raising counter-regulatory hormones, it's burning fat for fuel. This is what we want. Do that 2 times out of the week. Just don't do them consecutively. Split those up. 5 days out of the week, you're gonna follow the 16-8 formula. This is a great long-term approach here. That means for 16 hours, you're fasting. You're in a fasting, a famine window. For 8 hours, you're feasting, you're eating. Okay, that could simply mean your last meal is at 8 p.m. and then you don't eat anything until 12 p.m. the next meal. And then you eat from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. So that's your eating window right there. That's a great strategy. Keep in mind that during the 5 days of the 16-8 formula, I would love for you to exercise. If you really want to ramp up fat burning, exercising in the fasted state is such a huge key for you. Work out, train in the fasted state, and then here's another tip for you. Continue fasting 2 to 5 hours after your workout. I know it sounds crazy and you're gonna lose all this muscle. You're not, I promise you. The human body is much more sophisticated than that. In fact, we have human growth hormone that continues to freaking ramp up when you do this, and that's muscle preserving. It's the best fat burning hormone that we have. So do that. Do some high intensity sprints. Maybe you're doing some sprinting in your running, or you're doing some cycling. Do some squats, do some compound movements. It doesn't have to be an hour long. I'm telling you, 15 to 25 minutes, high intensity workout, and it'll be great for you. I'm not talking about long, boring cardio here. When you are eating, right, during this 8-hour window, eat high quality fat and protein with each meal, and eat until full. We want to follow this cycle of feast and famine. We're mimicking our ancestors here. So we're fasting, right? We're in a famine state, and then we're feasting. Famine, feast, famine, feast. So you want to eat until full. Eat until you feel full. And when you eat high quality protein and high quality fat, it's going to satiate you. It's going to hold you over longer for your next fast. If you want to learn more about intermittent fasting, I wrote a book. It's a best-selling book on Amazon. I answer the top 20 questions on intermittent fasting, and you could get it for free. I back it up with science. It's a very easy read. It'll give you some steps to follow before you even start fasting. Go to fastingcheatsheet.com. You could claim that book for free. If people wanted to shed stubborn fat, Mike, how can walking help with this? And what is the right method of walking to make this more efficient?
Ben, great question. I think people need to think about walking as a mandatory aspect of their lifestyle, irrespective of whatever diet or fasting program they're doing. Various studies have been emerging over the past, I want to say 5 or 6 years, finding that the threshold for the number of steps that we should be walking every day is right around 9,000. So that's what people should aim for. Other studies show about 12,000 for preventing different diseases. And these are common conditions. There was a huge meta-analysis involving 1.3 million people finding that If you walk at least 8,600 steps per day, you can avoid and reduce your risk of developing all sorts of conditions from sleep apnea to depression to high blood pressure, improving metabolic health, reducing visceral fat. So that's really important. But getting back to your question specifically about losing belly fat, we should be breaking our walks up into what I consider, and researchers talk about this, exercise snacks. So having 3 or 4 2,500 step sessions interspersed throughout the day. So, people are always wondering like, well, will coffee break my fast? Will this or that break my fast? Walking actually helps you trigger the autophagy mechanisms that are some of the health benefits linked with fasting. We can get into the sort of synergy between exercise and autophagy and the parallels with fasting later. But to get real granular with this, 3 to 4 2,500 or 3,000 step sessions. And so what that might look like is before you have breakfast in the morning. A lot of people fast in the morning. A lot of your listeners do that. Just go out and get 2,500, 3,000 steps, and then around after lunchtime, after your first major meal, get another 3,000 steps. And then after dinner, you get 3,000. And if you do these little exercise breaks, it's actually more effective than just going to the gym and doing, say, 45 minutes on a treadmill or a 45-minute walk. So interspersing exercise and walking throughout the day is better than just doing one bout of exercise. And I like to share the research from a gentleman known as his name is 𝙈𝙁𝘍𝙍𝘍 at UT Austin, and he's published many randomized controlled trials where they randomize subjects to either a low step count group, medium step count, and high step count. And to enumerate those step counts, we're talking 2,600 steps for a whole day. So just relegating people to a lab where they're only walking with their pedometer 2,500 steps. And then they randomize people to either walk 4,500 steps or 9,000 steps. And then what they do after this is, I think, over the course of 2 and 4 days, depending upon which study they publish, they've done a few of these different trials. Then after those interventions, they will give the subjects a standardized high fat test meal. And they'll look at markers of fat oxidation as well as post-meal hypertriglyceridemia. So I know you talk a lot about lipids and biomarkers. High post-meal triglycerides are a strong independent risk factor of future heart disease as well as metabolic deterioration, and it's a proxy of poor fat utilization and handling and poor fat oxidation. So you don't want a strong high post-meal triglyceride level that would suggest that you have some degree of poor metabolic health. And so what the investigators found is when people do not walk at least 8,000 steps per day after the standardized test meal, they have an exaggerated post-meal level of their blood triglycerides, which, as I mentioned, very problematic, arguably worse than LDL cholesterol, which we can get into later. And the differential in fat oxidation between the low step count group, again, most people are just walking about 2,000, 3,000 steps per day. They get up, they walk, they go to the car, they drive to work, they get in the office, they sit all day, then they drive home and watch TV. And so most people are pretty sedentary. And there was a 30% reduction when comparing the high step count group, around 8,500 steps, compared to the 2,600 step count. So if we think about just 2 days, and this is, some people might be traveling, going to Yosemite or Yellowstone with the family, they're in an RV, Winnebago, they're eating chips and hot dogs and things like that, sitting around or on an airplane. So we do this, people do this all the time, and we wonder why we can't lose fat. And this is one very simple way to just improve your body's ability to burn fat. Because going further, what this study did is they also, in one arm of the study, they had individuals do a 60-minute zone 2 exercise session, which, as we know, zone 2 is actually, I don't think it's the best for long-term fat loss, but when you're doing zone 2 low intensity cardio, you tend to, the body relies more upon burning fat for fuel to give your muscles energy during that exercise session. There wasn't a statistically significant increase in fat oxidation in the low step count group, meaning that if people don't walk a lot, but they go to the gym, they're not getting the most mileage from that gym session because they're not just doing these daily activities of daily living that are supporting fat oxidation. So yeah, to be very concise, 3 to 4 sessions, walking sessions of 2,500 to 3,000 steps interspersed throughout the day. And honestly, Ben, this is great for mental focus. I mean, you can only focus on one, finite task for a short period of time. And so this just really helps break up the day. You feel better, you digest your food better. We can get into the circadian rhythm health because I encourage people to walk outside. Even on a cloudy day, the intensity of the sun, the lux, is well over 1,000, which really helps to entrain your circadian clock system and foster that sleep pressure later in the day. So there's a bunch of different health benefits, but yeah, it really helps people lose a lot more belly fat.
I'm sold. I have been sold for quite some time. You broke it down so well, and the evidence, this research is clear that it's beneficial, especially when you chunk it out. So 9,000 steps per day seems to be the target. I tend to get around 12 or 13,000 on average per day, and it's chunked. It's not in one long workout. So I tend to do that naturally with my day to day. It's the benefit of having a dog, by the way. I walk him at least twice a day, so I get outside. You mentioned going for a walk after dinner. I'd love for you to share the benefits of going for a walk after eating maybe a higher carb meal, of what it does to kind of blunt that postprandial glucose.
Yeah, this is amazing. And the way that I sort of figured this out, I mean, obviously there's research to show this, but back when continuous glucose monitors, the Abbott Freestyle came on the market back in 2017, I had been doing keto, eating a low carb diet since 2014, got into it. And I was like, kind of curious, like if I were to go to a vegan restaurant here in Seattle, I just Googled the most popular vegan restaurant. My family went in there and we just said, hey, we've never been here before. Give us the most popular items on the menu. And it was, pizza and some breads and some different things. And I'm testing my glucose in real time. I calibrated the glucose monitor and so forth. And I could see my glucose start to continuously increase to 185 milligrams per deciliter. And so for folks listening, that is in the pre-diabetic range. Now, I know that might sound alarming. People are like, well, you're diabetic. It's like, no, I had been used to eating a low carb diet for a while. And research shows this. When you get habitually accustomed to eating a low carb diet and then you have a very high carb meal, your body can have an over exaggerated response to that meal. And that's exactly what happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need to go for a walk to get this down. And no kidding, Ben, I went for my usual 1 mile walk with the dogs, came back and my glucose went from 185 to 85 milligrams per deciliter. And I made a video on this and I was just blown away. We hear all the time about exercise is good for fat loss. Exercise helps with blood flow. Exercise, helps reduce glucose and improve the peaks and troughs in glucose levels. But in real time, I was able to see this and I thought, wow, this is really powerful. And it really speaks to when you go to other parts of the world. I know some of your audience lives outside of North America, but most are relegated to North America. That's just kind of how YouTube works. And, when you go to Europe and other places, people just walk. They don't have cars and things like this. They have public transportation, but people are walking in this. But yet they're eating bread and baguettes and pasta. You're like, well, why don't we see the obesity in parts of Europe where they do have a relatively high carbohydrate diet? And my hypothesis is they're just walking more. They're just more active and moving around more. So that I think is really important. So if someone does have a cheat meal, someone listening is going to go to a birthday or a wedding or have a barbecue, and there might be temptations with a hot dog or some chips or some ice cream or whatever. If you just go for a vigorous walk for 15, 20 minutes, that's all it takes. You can literally cut your glucose in half by doing that. And obviously there's many health benefits too, because insulin, if you are normally low carb and then you have a high glucose or high calorie meal, you're going to have an over exaggerated insulin response to that. And we know there's downsides to insulin in terms of facilitating atherosclerosis and the formation of plaque in your arteries, inflammation, immune suppression. There's a long list. And so by just helping your body do what insulin would normally do and put glucose into your muscles, by moving your muscles, you're causing them to absorb that glucose. And we already know this. In the post-meal window, about 80% of glucose is deposited in skeletal muscle. So if you just add some stimulus there by walking, because people don't think about muscle as an organ. It's an organ just like your thyroid, just like your liver, just like your pancreas. But in order for this organ to work, it needs stimulation. And so we need to stimulate this organ through activity. And that's where exercise really comes in. And people don't think that walking is an exercise, but it really is. You're moving those muscles. And I will tell you, there's research out of Copenhagen. Researchers in Denmark outside of Copenhagen have done studies finding that in diabetics, the leg muscles become insulin resistant before the musculature in the upper body. And I know people go to the gym, they lift, chest and biceps, and I do that stuff too. I like lifting weights, but you need a lot of stimulation in your legs because for some reason they become sort of disease-like before the musculature in the upper body. And I would argue that part of that is because we have, through natural selection and
This is surprising to a lot of people, but I hate to cook. It's time consuming, and when I see a recipe with a whole bunch of ingredients that take a whole bunch of time, I just tend to not do it. So I decided to put together a program for you. This is a keto recipe of the week program. I personally handpicked every recipe, and I made it very easy to follow, quick to make. And these are fat-burning, delicious, tasty recipes that I actually make in the kitchen, even though I don't enjoy cooking. Every week in this program, you'll be sent a newsletter with why I chose this recipe and how to make this recipe so you could master this keto lifestyle. This is the easiest way to adopt the keto lifestyle, and even if you're not doing keto, it's a great way to incorporate some fat-burning meals. You'll get breakfast, lunch, and dinner items, and we're throwing in hundreds of dollars in free bonuses if you join us. It's only $9.97 per month. You could cancel anytime, and you get those free bonuses. So head over to KetoCampRecipes.com to learn more about the keto recipe of the week and the free bonuses. Remember, camp is spelled with a K, and go check it out. If you're anything like me and you just want quick, easy, and fat-burning delicious recipes, this is for you.
Just how humans are either hunting historically, ancestrally, hunting or gathering. We're moving. We're never meant to sit in our cars for 3 hours a day in rush hour traffic or sit in desks. We should be moving. And this is one of the things, if you look at the blue zone research, we're hearing so much push about, well, you got to go on a plant-based diet because see, these blue zones eat more plants than meat, depending upon the blue zone. So therefore the plant-based diet is the key here. It's the sine qua non of longevity. Well, not so fast. These blue zone areas are also characterized by a lot of recreational activity. In Sardinia and parts of Costa Rica, in Japan, these people move. They don't sit in their cars. They're moving throughout the day, having these so-called exercise snacks. So again, if you have a cheat meal, go for a brisk walk. It will literally cut your glucose levels almost in half.
So good, Mike. There's a lot to unpack there. With the blue zone conversation, there's so many moving parts outside of what you just said, right? They also have community. They practice gratitude. And I had Mary Rudick here a couple months ago. I interviewed her. Are you familiar with Mary Rudick at all? Mm-hmm. She's been to all the blue zones. She's done a lot of research, super smart woman. And she told me every single blue zone, she visited and stayed with all of them for months. They all had animal products, whether there was the vegetables cooked in the butter or the beef tallow or whatever it was, but they all consumed animal products. There wasn't one that was 100% strictly plant-based. With the walking, there's so many benefits that you explained, but I always tell my students, I know it's maybe not realistic to go for a walk after every meal, but if you could do it after your biggest meal, maybe the meal that has the most carbohydrates, you'll get the biggest benefit. And to your point with your experiment, 185 milligrams per deciliter down to 85 in an hour just by going for a 1 mile walk. Tremendous. And I think about the Italy and the Europe, the disease and the obesity rates and their life expectancy and how it's so much better there than it is now. And I agree with you that they are walking more. They also have more community and enjoy themselves. But also in 2016, they banned glyphosate and all these artificial dyes. And I think that's a big part of it too. We're still allowing all this crap that you show on your Instagram feed all the time. We're allowing this crap. The FDA is allowing this in our food supply, while Europe, Italy, they've banned it. And they eat, I believe, 30% more carbohydrates. They have a longer life expectancy. They have a quarter of the amount of gyms we have in the US, yet they're healthier and leaner. So I think it is a lot of different variables with Europe.
Well, to go one step further, they smoke like it's 1970s. I mean, it's insane. True. I just got back from France a couple of weeks ago. Every restaurant has an ashtray on it. I mean, it's insane. Young kids, I was at a park. We were doing pull-ups in a park and just trying to get a little workout here because there is not a lot of gyms, like you said, Ben. And there's a kid that was like not much older than my daughter, about 13, and he's just ripping on this vape pen. And he didn't speak English, but his friends did. And I was like, should I say anything? I'm like, I should say something. This kid doesn't know the harms of vaping at such a young age. And he was kind of watching me do pull-ups. We had our shirts off and everything. I was like, hey, does your dad know that you vape? And his friend had to translate it in French and then go back to me in English. And he's like, no. I'm like, please tell your friend this is really bad for his growth. I was trying to appeal to a young man. What would affect a young, motivate,
Smart.
he's going to probably affect his growth, and all his friends were like, see, even he says, don't do it. As American says it's bad. And he kind of had a look on him like, yeah. And he put the pen in his pocket. Hopefully he'll change. But the point is, Europeans, to your point, Ben, they're doing a lot of things wrong, but paradoxically, they're living so much longer, and you don't see the obesity. The rates of heart disease, I mean, if you look at the proportion of the population that has death from heart disease in Europe or parts of France, Italy, compared to here, significantly lower. And it raises a lot of questions because, again, to your point, there's a lot of fat and animal fat and meat. I mean, I didn't see a lot of vegetarian or vegan options. When I went to restaurants and in grocery stores and things like that, there's a lot of bread, a lot of carbs, animal fats, red meat. You see young women eating red meat and having burgers and this and smoking. So part of that, I think, is the psychosocial aspect of it, the community, the socialization. I feel like we are very socially isolated here in the US and don't really communicate with people outside of screens. But then the nature and the walking, there's a lot to it. And like you said, the additives in the food obviously make a big difference. But we can learn from this. It doesn't mean we should all go out and start smoking or vaping. But I think if we try to live a lifestyle that mirrors some of that and spending time in nature, spending time with friends, just going to a coffee shop or going to a friend's house and just talking without your phone out, that actually has health benefits. So
Yeah, right on. We can learn a lot from them. But so step number one for those looking to burn fat, optimize their glucose levels, insulin, and just overall metabolic health, get 9,000 steps per day. And if you could chunk it up to 3 to 4 different sessions, that's going to be the best way to do it. Have you seen any research showing that? I think you said 12,000. There was some research showing there were some, cardiovascular benefits. What was the research showing there?
Yeah, so this was a meta-analysis published last year by a gentleman, Bannock et al. And this was published, I want to say it was Nature Reviews Cardiology, or it was a major high-impact journal. And they analyzed all the different studies. There's been a lot of long-term studies looking at different, like the UK Biobank and here the Nurses Health Initiative and Physicians Health follow-up study. There's all these different cohorts and finding using accelerometer data or pedometers of people that have the ability to enumerate step count. And what they found is that there was a strong statistical association when comparing low step count people to groups, to high groups, and then using statistical modeling to also look at medical health records and finding that when people have reported on their pedometers more than 9,000 steps per day, they have statistically lower odds of having osteoarthritis, depression, asthma, sleep apnea, gastrointestinal reflux disorder. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, basically all the stuff that people are going to the doctor for because they feel unwell can be ameliorated in part through walking. And so we now have tons of research to really support this. So I think this should be something that all doctors and frontline health professionals are working on. It makes your supplements work better because the more physically fit you are, your berberine going to work better, or your fish oil, or your magnesium, fill in the blank. A lot of people can't sleep, so they're slamming magnesium, but the best way to create sleep pressure is to get sunshine and to move your body, and so there's a lot of carryover here. And I think it's low hanging fruit. And I don't know, maybe people see elderly in the neighborhood walking, so they think, oh, that can be that effective. It's not for me, but this is something that young people should do, old people. It's had a lot of carryover. I'm just talk personally. My daughter is running at nationals next week and is seeded eighth for the 1,500 meter run, which is basically a mile. And all we've been doing her whole life is just walking, hiking and walking. And so she has built up this really dense base of capillary and mitochondrial function that has now enabled her, it's her first year running track, to become an elite runner. And so she hasn't ran at all up until she was 11 years old this last year. So there's a lot of benefits here, and you can get the family involved. You talk to young kids now and like, what do you do at night? Oh, I'm on my phone. Why not go out for a walk or go for a hike? I mean, these things are really beneficial. getting a little off topic here, but Steve Jobs, he would have meetings. Everyone knows, creator of the Apple, the iStore, the App Store, the iPhone, like really great mind, great innovator. He wouldn't have meetings at a desk job over Zoom. He'd take, people, developers, engineers, and they would go for like a 45-minute walk, because you do your best thinking there. If you ever have a challenge in your relationship, instead of be kind of competitive or confrontational face to face, we tend to do that. Just go for a walk and be like, hey, look, you doing this thing makes me feel a certain way, or I know you feel off because I do this and I'm sorry. You can really have a less confrontational conversation. And so I think we should just be incorporating this into our culture at scale.
I agree, Mike. And I remember reading a book maybe in 2017, 2018 called Spark, the science behind exercise in the brain.
It's
and it started
right back there, actually.
Oh, do you have it back there? Yeah.
Right there.
Such a great book. And it started off talking about this school in Naperville, Illinois, and how, this wasn't like the school that was like the high-end private school that a lot of parents were paying a lot of money for their children to go there. It was kind of like in the average of private schools, but they kept scoring the best test grades, A+. They had the best averages with their students, and they wanted to determine, what's so special about these students. And it turns out they were requiring them to do physical education, PE, before they started their classes, right? Because it helped boost brain-derived neurotrophic factor, all the other benefits he spoke about. So if you want to be productive, to Mike's point, whether you're a mom, an entrepreneur, a business person, whatever it is, if you just want to be more productive, getting this morning walk in every single morning has the potential to help you stay more sharp and focused for the rest of the day. What a fascinating book. And I know we've had so much more research come out on BDNF, especially fasting could help it. But that was the first book that I learned the connection between exercise and brain function.
It's amazing. And to take that one step further, Ben, not specifically about the brain, but because we know fasting and autophagy does impact brain health, walking and exercise make autophagy and I should say, let me go back. Walking and exercise enhance the health benefits of fasting and make fasting more effective. I like to share this when I do presentations on stage, especially when fasting was really, really popular back in 2018, 2019. It still is today, but many people are, doing 5-day fasts or 7-day water fasts or, 36-hour fasts all the time. And when you look at a study, and I can share this so that you can put it in the show notes, it tracked individuals who were overweight and did a 36-hour fast. And then they had a subset of subjects who were lean and physically fit and recreationally active. They went to the gym, they worked out, they walked, they had a high VO2 max. So that's how they were able to differentiate fitness. And these were age matched. So it wasn't like there were some really old people and young people. It was age matched VO2 max, and they stratified people that way. And so the people that had the high VO2 max, after just 18 hours of fasting, they had markers of autophagy initiation proteins, ATG1, ATG17. It gets complex, but this is how researchers ascertain whether or not autophagy is being initiated upon fasting. The people who had a high VO2 max because they exercised had markers of autophagy initiation so much higher at just 18 hours compared to the sedentary people who didn't exercise at 36 hours. So if you walk and if you exercise and do the things that we've been talking about, you don't have to double down on fasting as much. And I think that's really, basically it makes fasting more efficient is what I'm trying to say here, because we think fasting and autophagy, well, that parallel, those mechanisms with exercise, part of how our muscles repair from the damage of exercise is by way of autophagy. So when we think about autophagy, instead of just thinking fasting, think also exercise. Both modalities upregulate this important longevity enhancing process known as autophagy. So I think that's really important, especially to the fasting community, because people are like, oh, I don't need to exercise, I fast. It's like, no, you should exercise because it makes your fasting so much more effective and efficient.
So true. I know that I feel the best when I do a fasted workout like I did this morning, but I am also really intentional with getting enough amino acids and protein when have my eating window, especially because I'm looking to actually build some muscle personally. Yes. But so you're saying, Mike, that if somebody fasted 36 hours, but they were sedentary, the levels of autophagy they achieved might be the same as somebody who fasted 18 hours, but was really active during the 18 hours.
Well, this study found the people who were sedentary and fasted 36 hours didn't even hit the same level of autophagy initiation compared to people who are physically active and only the people that were physically fit also fasted 36 hours as well. But the degree of autophagy initiation protein markers happened earlier, just at 18 hours into the fast is what I'm trying to say here. So essentially, when you're physically fit, you get so much more. If we're trying to look at autophagy as a proxy of the health benefits linked with fasting, it makes that process happen sooner in the fast and to a much higher degree compared to if we're not fit, if we don't exercise. That's the point. So we really, if you're like, look, I need to lose a bunch of weight, I have a wedding coming up, I'm going to do a 5-day fast. Well, you should also start exercising now so that 5-day fast is much more effective in terms of, because the thing about exercise, it's muscle sparing too. One of the downsides of fasting is it, there is a growth hormone surge and some periodic spikes in growth hormone, but everyone knows, you do lose a little bit of muscle mass when you fast. Like I don't care what other people say. You lose strength and you lose some muscle mass. I mean, I think that's well recognized at this point. So one way to mitigate that, because exercise is anti-catabolic, there's two ways to mitigate the loss of muscle. You're going to have protein or insulin, which is counterproductive to have when you're fasting, or you could exercise. Exercise has anti-catabolic effects. And so that's the thing that you can do to increase muscle protein synthesis, even independent of the amino acids, the dearth of amino acids during a fasting session. So people should still exercise, should still walk, do these same step counts that we've been talking about, even on a 3 or 5-day fast.
I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the fasting and muscle loss conversation, because I'm personally still kind of looking at different research and not 100% certain on what's happening here. Because I've seen some research showing that most of what is lost is volume, not mass. And just a few days ago, I had Dr. Fung back on the show, and he's telling me that it is mostly water, it's mostly glycogen, it's not necessarily strength and muscle. And when they're doing these studies and they're testing like with the bioimpedance, it's not giving you the full picture and what happens when you break the fast and refeed. So I'd love for you to break that down a little bit more. Are we actually losing strength and muscle mass, or is it volume, and is it coming back after we refeed with amino acids?
Yeah, Ben, it's a great question. And sadly, we don't have a lot of randomized controlled trials to really support these things. We generally have to rely upon anecdotal reports of people. We can look at the work of the Minnesota fasting experiment with Ansel Keys. Actually, I know he has a bad rap in the keto community because of his work with the 7-country studies and generating this now sort of refuted hypothesis about the lipid cardiovascular disease model, and so forth. But Ansel Keys did do there's a bunch of good books on this for lay people about the Minnesota starvation experiment. And what he found is that when individuals have relatively low amounts of body fat, prolonged fasting, you have to get the energy from somewhere. And so if you have really low body fat, that energy is going to start to dip into muscle. And so you will,
what percentage is that? Like what, like 5%, 3%? It's somewhere in the single digits.
I don't know the thresholds. I really don't. But I think, if you're sub 12% body fat as a man and maybe 17% body fat as a woman, and you're doing a really long fast, you're probably going to lose some skeletal muscle. Now, can you get that back? Yeah, sure. Like absolutely. But in my opinion, because I used to do a lot of 3 to 5-day fasts.
I remember.
This was my jam. I was so excited about this. I've been to Toronto twice, interviewed Jason Fung. I used to work out there, and I would just bake in fasting to my travel plans. It saved time. I didn't have to eat. I was kind of in the fasting high ketones. It was amazing. Then I started, to go back to do my normal gym routines, and I would work out when I traveled, and I was just like so weak. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then so I just was like, had to be honest with myself. Like, you know what? I don't think that this is the best thing for maintaining strength and muscle, so I have since scaled back and do like a 1-day 24-hour or 18-hour fast, basically on Mondays. That's been my thing for a lot of years, and just again, this is anecdotal N of 1. My body fat hovers around 13% most of the year. I can get down in the summer when I'm hiking a lot around 12, but around that point. And I found, at least for me, I'm just speaking, I can't say this as for a population wide, analysis, definitely lost muscle and strength. And so it's a lot easier for me now to maintain muscle and strength. And here's the thing for me, why does that really matter, Mike? You're not a paid bodybuilder. I don't make any money off my physique, but mentally, our self-perception of aging impacts our pace of biologic aging. And not to deviate too much, but there's been a 40-year study out of New Zealand called the Dunedin study. And one of the most strongest associations with the increased pace of biologic aging, let me just pause just real quick. I'll be 42 next month, right? Chronologically, I'm 42. My cells could be 39 or they could be 45. They could be 50. It just depends on my pace of biologic aging. And after reading and following this Dunedin study, which is incredibly fascinating, one of the strongest predictors of the pace of biologic aging is negative perception of aging. It's all in your head. So if you look in the mirror and think, gosh, I'm getting smaller, weaker, and older, that is going to be that's going to be counterproductive to aging more gracefully. So I like to be strong and think in my head like I'm just as strong, and I am now as strong as I was when I was playing football in high school when I was 18. So that, to me, in my opinion, means more than to be like, yeah, I can do 5-day fasts all the time and I'm super skinny and frail and weak. Like, I just was like, gosh, I'm getting older, man. I was in my I'm like, I can't lift weights like I used to. It just must be aging. Like, and I started to have like a negative perception of how I was aging. So I'm like, so I don't do that. So that's just me. Everyone's different. If someone has had cancer before, if someone has first degree relatives that have died from cancer and they're really concerned about, breast cancer and some of the cancers that are impacted by glucose metabolism, colon, pancreatic, brain cancer. I get it. I understand why you want to fast and so forth, but that's not my goal here. I just want to be around for my daughter and hopefully grandkids and be healthy as I can and pain-free. So that's just what I've found. Now, going back to the mechanisms here, again, what the research does show, is in an energy deficit, in dieting bodybuilders, in fasting, you name it. Muscle mass, the rate of muscle mass loss varies based upon the percentage of body fat. It can be as low as 15% of the total weight loss during a calorie deficit or fasting period, up to as much as 40%. And the way that we mitigate that is through anti-catabolic measures. And so we talked about how exercise is anti-catabolic. And so if you're going to do extended fasting, I would make sure to do periodic push-ups, do some air squats, do some pull-ups, do some walking. That might help mitigate some of that.
What are the dangers of a sedentary lifestyle, and what are some of the warning signs that people fall into with this danger, Shane?
So I'm going to answer using a simple metaphor, and then I'll move on to the kind of the underlying dangers. So I want you to imagine, a lot of us are getting into cycling because of the pandemic. And imagine you've went out in the early stages of the pandemic and you bought yourself a lovely new racing bike. And then you got lazy and you left it in your shed. And you decided a week ago that after 3 years, you're actually going to use it. It's been sedentary for that period of time. In other words, it hasn't been moving. How do you think it'll act? It won't perform very well. The tires will be flat. The brakes probably won't work. The chain may have come loose. Lots and lots of things will have gone awry. And this is because a bicycle, just like the body, needs regular challenge, it needs regular stresses, and it needs regular use. So to be clear about sedentary lifestyle, it is the case that every public health agency, without exception, right across the world, recommends that we get minimum levels of activity in over the course of typically at the day or the week, but they all come in at recommendations that say something of the order perhaps of 3 to 5 hours reasonable exercise per week. In other words, sort of 30, 45 minutes a day. Now, why are they saying this? They're saying this because we have bodies that are built for movement. We do not have bodies that are built for a sedentary lifestyle. And this is in contrast to our great ape cousins who spend all day lying around. We have bodies that are built to allow us to walk around in the world, to navigate in the world, to hunt about, to explore, exploit, do all sorts of things in the world. And when we don't move, you get things like spikes in blood glucose, which are bad for you. They can predispose you to type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome. It can cause the accumulation of undesirable cholesterols in the blood and critically increase pro inflammatory factors right around the body, so that you get swelling in joints, you may get accumulation of fluid in various parts of the body. Lots and lots of things go wrong. And it's also the case that movement is not alone good for the body, good for the heart, but it's also good for the brain for reasons we'll get into over the course of the interview.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that. That's your specialty. So every public health protocol has movement, exercise as a standard. I know a lot of organizations cannot agree to nutrition, but they could agree to, yeah, move your body. That is a good thing. And the analogy is perfect because I'm one of those people. Many years ago, I got a nice fancy bike, a carbon fiber bike, and I used it for a little bit. And then it sat in my garage. And then to your point, the tires got flat, the chains needed to be lubricated, and it just created some problems. So similar to our bodies, when we're not moving the body the way that we're designed to move, and you're going to make the case for that, we start to see higher blood sugar levels, which could creep up into metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and eventually some issues with the brain. Let's focus on that brain part. Like, what's happening to the brain when we're not active?
Yeah, so there's lots of things going on. So the first point to make really is that the brain, along with the liver, are the two most metabolically active and energy intensive parts of the body. Depends on your estimate, but most estimates come down to the idea that the brain consumes about a fifth of the output of the heart. And this is because the brain has no energy stores. There's no fatty deposits it can use. It doesn't have any native stores of glucose. It requires a continual traffic from the heart to flush through the brain to keep it in good health. Now, one thing that's become very clear, I think, over the past couple of years is that the body needs a degree of stress. You need to put stress on bone in order to build healthy bone. You need to put stress on muscle in order to build healthy muscle, and you need to put stress in the cardiovascular system in order to keep it in good shape. Obviously, not excessive levels of stress, but you do need to challenge it regularly. Now, your brain is in a rather slightly different position to these other organs because it tells them what to do. So when you're sitting, for example, as we're both doing, unfortunately at the moment, this ideally should be a walking interview, you're not actually challenging your brain very much. Now, I'm sitting forward, and the challenge in my body is a little bit greater than it would be than if I was slouched back in my chair. Why is that? Because one of the primary jobs of the brain is to maintain the stability of the head in space. You don't want your head flopping around the place, but that challenge doesn't exist if you're relaxed back in your chair. Then you have to maintain your spine with a particular vertical. And then if you stand up, you actually have to maintain attention across the whole of the axis of the body so that you don't succumb to gravity. So these are all good challenges for the brain. And what we now know with a very, very high degree of certainty is that movement changes at a very, very deep level the rhythms, the electrical rhythms that you have in the brain, and it facilitates the production of a particular molecule, what's known as a trophic factor, which helps maintain the health of the synapses, so the connections between individual brain cells. Movement is good for you, or good for your brain in all sorts of ways, but at a very, very fundamental physiological level, your brain needs the challenge from standing up. It doesn't feel like a challenge unless something's gone wrong. You know, stand up while you're dizzy. That's hard. Stand up if you've got an injury to your leg. That's hard. Stand up if you've not been standing much through the course of your life, and discover how getting up out of a chair actually becomes a difficult thing because you've got sarcopenia. So you do need to challenge your body regularly, and your body won't challenge itself. It's waiting for a command signal from the brain to say, get moving.
Yeah, so the theme here is stress, and you're talking about a beneficial stress, this hormesis, hormetic
Yeah,
stress,
or
where
eustress, as it's sometimes called.
stress, which you
Yeah,
talk about in your book. There's this good stress, and the issue is twofold, right? The first issue, which most people are dealing with, is not enough stress. They're too sedentary. They're not moving around enough. But then there is a small percentage of people who do too much stress, and you made the point that too much is also not a good thing. So how do we find that balance? Like, what are the things we're paying attention to know if we're adapting to these stressors we're now applying to our life?
Yeah, so typically, there are lots of ways of thinking about this, but the way I like to think about this is that you need to benchmark yourself relative to your own performance and relative to other people. And the way I do that for my own personal case is that I use the app on my phone to measure the number of walking steps I take per day. And I know what level I like to hit in terms of my target number of steps, but I also know where I am relative to the population at large. And I'm determined to always exceed the population average in
Yes.
terms of walking every day. Now, I think the key thing to say is that most people don't walk very much. Unfortunately, we know this from smartphone data. The average person in a mechanized society walks somewhere between 4.5 and maybe 5,500 steps a day. So that's
Wow.
true in North America. It's true in Western Europe. It's the Japanese walk probably the most, and they're just about 6,000 steps per day on average. And this is because they have an exceptional public transport system, a very large population in a very small space. So they have to take trains, so they walk an awful lot. Um, but we know also that infants, as they're becoming toddlers, when they're starting to learn to walk a hell of a lot. Depending on the study that you look at, they're walking anything from maybe 800 to 1,400 steps per hour, and they're keeping that going for many hours a day. And we know this, if you uh, look after kids who are making that transition, they're always mooching around doing something. So they walk a lot. And then this is something we lose in Western mechanized societies. Now, in non-mechanized societies, we also actually have very, very good data as well about what kind of walking happens. So Herman Ponzer at Duke University has a fantastic book out last year called Burn on metabolism. And he has done some remarkable work with the Hadza in Tanzania over the past 15 or so years. And they will wear tracking devices, which is very kind of them. And he has been able, with his colleagues, to build up a very, very good picture of the kinds of amounts of walking they do on average per day. And what you see in those societies where they're wholly reliant on non-mechanized transport, they have to walk around under their own steam. Males typically walk an average of about 14 to 16,000 steps a day, and females
Wow.
walk around about 12 to 14,000 steps per day. With great variation. There, in some of the charts that he's produced, you see some people walking up to 40,000 steps a day. So that's like 30 kilometers. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Um, yeah, but the point that I would make is that we know from studies of people who've been living a sedentary lifestyle who are doing things, and I recount such as an example in my book on the 𝙎𝙬𝙍𝙀 of an individual male in his mid 60s who had been very sedentary, adapted very quickly to walking 15 kilometers or so, or 20 kilometers or so a day on the 𝙎𝙬𝙍𝙀 in northern Italy. And you can adapt to the rigors of a walk like that much, much more quickly and with less injury than you can to running 20 kilometers per day.
Yep.
There's a really interesting dissociation there. We humans are absolutely brilliant walkers. We're good runners. I'm not trying to diss running at all, but we're super at walking. And what we're particularly good at, and this is a theme I pick up in the book quite a bit, is we're really good social walkers, because that's how we conquered the world. We walked out of Africa in families, in tribes, in groups, and we did it together. And that meant we had to be amazingly attuned to each other while we do those walks.
It's so fascinating. We are designed to walk. And what are what are your thoughts on the amount of steps that you would recommend that we hit each day? I know you said in the beginning already that you're beating your prior best. You're not competing against anybody else. So the goal is to eventually get there. But what would be that minimum step requirement that you say would be, you want to hit this, build your way to hit this, and you're going to be able to achieve these health results we're seeking?
Yeah. So again, because of smartphones, we're starting to get really good data on the relationship between the numbers of steps that people take per day and all-cause mortality. And so this is from heart attack, from stroke, from cancer, from any infection, from all of the other possibilities. And what the data seem to show reasonably clearly is that if you're hitting somewhere north of between 5 and 7,500 steps per day, you would reduce your all-cause mortality, again, depending on the study, between 30 and 50%. So
Wow.
that's a huge number. Now, it's epidemiological, and
Okay.
conducting studies where you're intervening to get people who are sedentary to walk more than they were, those are hard studies to do. But the few handful that have come along seem to come to the same conclusion, that there's instant or reasonably quick metabolic benefits from getting people who weren't moving to a condition where they are moving. Now, I personally like, if I can do it, and the Irish weather has been a bit rotten for this summer, but I typically try to aim for somewhere between 12 and 14,000 steps a day myself. And I break that up across the course of the day. And that's another lesson I think that we're also learning, that if you have a very sedentary lifestyle where you're eating the wrong food, you're sitting all day, and then you're hitting the gym hoping to burn it off, you can't outrun a lifestyle like that. On the other hand, if it is the case that you're getting regular intermittent challenge right throughout the course of the day, that gives you great health benefits, and you really will feel super as a result of doing that. Now, obviously, there are nuances to the what each individual can do, and all of the rest of it. But I think the general advice that you should walk. What I usually say is walk 5,000 steps a day more than you're walking, because you're not walking very much. So
That's
if you're
good.
an average Westerner, you're doing 4,000 steps a day. Add 5, you'll be at 9. That's great.
That's a great tip, and that's surprising that those studies show just 5 to 7,000 steps with that reduction in all cause mortality. That's not that many steps. It really isn't.
Yeah, no,
To be able to, I was going to say, it's easy to hit that, especially if you just build it into your day, like you're saying. You're not necessarily going to the gym for an hour to get those steps. That's not even the best way to do it. You're building it into your day. Like for me, I have a dog, right? It's very easy for me to get a lot of steps because I walk my dog at least twice per day. And if I look at I have my Aura ring, which tracks my steps. When I look at my last, let's say, few days, so today it's what, 3:25 p.m. for me, and I already have 6,257 steps. Yesterday I had 11,000, the day before 10,000, and then 15,000, and then 7,000. So it was one day where I was under 10,000, but I'm pretty much getting 10,000 or more, probably 10 to 12,000 on average personally. And I am chunking it out throughout the rest of the day. So you would say that would be an
those are
optimal
great.
routine.
Those are great numbers. And what's remarkable, just to come back to the theme of the Hadza, and also another population, the Tsimane in South America, is that cardiac health in these populations is astonishingly good. There's one fantastic study, for example, of health in the Tsimane, who are a tribal society in South America, and this number, or this outcome, never ceases to amaze me. The average 80-year-old Tsimani's heart health is the equivalent of an average Westerner of 50. Uh,
Wow.
is that not amazing? And
That's
these are
cool.
people. It is, and these are people who never use cars. They live in an environment where you just can't use mechanized transport, so they're on their feet, or maybe they're in boats, but that's the most they're doing. Otherwise, they're moving around under their own steam all day. And there are other indicants of the cardiovascular fitness. The measures of atherosclerosis are in the direction that you would want them to be. Their lipid profile is as you would want it to be, and measures of coronary calcium and all of those kinds of things are in the expected directions. But here's the beautiful thing about these kinds of studies. This interventional studies that get Westerners who have not been mobile to do these kinds of walks show these positive changes too. So there's a positive feedback Uh, if you're not somebody who's used to walking and you're only doing 2,000 steps a day, increase it by 50%. That's still only 3,000 steps a day. Move that up by a third. That's only 4,000 steps a day. Move it up by another quarter. That takes you to 5. And get a partner to go and walk with. We're social walkers. We like walking together if you don't like walking by yourself. So it's perfectly achievable to raise the amount of walking that you're doing, depending, of course, on the environment that you're living in. So I'm lucky where I live because we've got good sidewalks. It's an old residential area that's easy to walk around. If you're living on the edge of a freeway, you might find that a little bit more difficult.
Yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
people need to be. I'm always forgiving of these things because the environment is really important as well.
I remember reading some of Dr. Wayne Dyer's work. Are you familiar with Dr. Wayne Dyer at all? He's
No.
passed on, but he was more in self-development, spirituality. But it reminded me of his work when what you just shared, because he would talk about getting in his steps each day. And this is like 40 years ago, before we had all this research. But he would travel a lot. He would do a lot of speaking. So he would stay at hotels, and he would literally walk the corridor, the hallway of the hotel room, to get those steps. And people would look at him like he was this weirdo, but he was like, I'm going to get these steps no matter what. So that kind of commitment
Yeah.
goes a long way. Like, there's
I,
always a
I
way to
get
do
where
it.
he's coming from, to be honest. It is the days when, for whatever reason, perhaps I've had a lot of things on and I just haven't managed to get out or get any walking in, or days when I feel hellishly sluggish. And
Same.
this is another thing that we'll probably touch on at some point. There are days when I'm much less productive than I would otherwise be. So time devoted to what is ostensibly a not directly work-related activity actually boosts your work when you're doing it, when you actually manage to get those steps in.
I definitely could relate to that as well. What are some creative ways that we can get in our steps each day to build those steps?
Yeah, so the first thing I think is turn on your mobile phone. I know people are down on mobile phones for all sorts of reasons, but having this little counter in your pocket so that you know what you're doing, it is simply the case that you did not know how many steps you took last Friday today without having that record from this wonderful little machine in your pocket.
True.
So the first thing you have to know is the number of steps that you're actually taking. So when you have a picture of that, then you're in a really, really good place. I think the second thing then is to become slightly obsessed with checking the number of steps that you do take per day. And again, there are loads of apps available. I'm not going to recommend any particular one. You just find the one that works for you, and check those regularly. Then I think, a key thing with walking is you don't need much by way of equipment. Comfortable pair of shoes. Here in Ireland, a raincoat maybe, and that's all you need. If you like podcasts, that's great. Listen to a podcast. I think ideally, define what the purpose of the walk is. Now, I don't mean this in a very laborious kind of way, but we have one word, which is walking, and lots of different purposes for that walk. So some walks might be to help you think through a problem. Some walks might be to help you think about the course of the next week and what you're planning to do with yourself over a few days. Some walks might be just to feel a bit better in yourselves because what you're trying to do is just get a little bit of activity in that you otherwise wouldn't have managed to do. So, and walking, as we will get to, I'm sure, is very useful for creative problem solving. Then I think you've got a step counter, comfortable pair of shoes. If you don't like walking by yourself, find somebody to walk with, or make phone calls when you're walking. You don't have to use your phone for just listening to podcasts or a book or whatever it happens to be. You can talk to people, and I think during the course of everyday life, if you're working in an office and you have to drive to that office, park as reasonably far away from the office as you can. Get in 5 or 6 minutes extra walking. Avoid the elevator if you can. If you're popping out for lunch, walk to a place that's a little bit further away walk back, don't eat your lunch at your desk. All those kinds of little things that are perfectly reasonable and just an ordinary part of life are really good ways of getting in extra steps. And if you are taking phone calls, never take them sitting down. Always get up and move around. You'll find that they're much, much better. You'll knock out, in the course of 40 minutes, you'll walk 3,000 steps without thinking about it. And if you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody, which happens in life, unfortunately, sometimes, go for a walk together and have the conversation. Don't sit across a desk looking in each other's eyes. That's a very aggressive thing to do. Walk where you're both focused on the horizon, and allow yourselves to talk through whatever the particular problem happens to be. It's a much, much easier and better way to walk yourself out of a problem rather than walking yourself into a problem. So I would concentrate on doing those kinds of things. I think also, a lot of us are desk bound for various reasons. Set a timer on your phone, set a timer on your laptop to just get up and move around for a minute or two every 20 minutes or so. Some people like walking desks.
Yeah.
I haven't really tried walking desks to any great extent. So I know people who have, and some people absolutely adore them. So if you have that option, I think, give that a shot as well. I think walking desks where the belt you're walking on is controlled by your own movement, rather than one that's fed by a motor, is probably better. You'll probably adapt to that more easily. But again, I think it's one of these questions of just, try and figure it out, see what works for you.
Well said. Those are really practical tips that we could do, and they all add up. Like you said, parking farther. Like instead of driving extra minutes to find that close parking spot to the grocery store, just find a spot that's down that parking lot and just walk
And
there.
just walk. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm sure this happens in the US just as much as it happens here. You see people driving around
It's true.
looking for parking as close as possible to the door of the shopping center or whatever it happens to be, when you should just take the first space.
That's what
Just
I do.
walk. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you save
I
yourself all
used
that hassle.
Seriously, I used to live in an apartment building. Now I live in a house, but I lived in an apartment building for 4 years, me and my fiance, and we lived on the 4th floor. And I 98% of the time took the stairs in the apartment building, going up, going down. Unless I had a whole bunch of things that were heavy, I would take the elevator. But other than that, I always took the steps. My dog took the steps with me. Like, I'm always looking for the steps. And we've been conditioned, and I know you talk about this, we've been conditioned to take the elevator and have things come quickly, and just the luxury that we have around us it's caused this sedentary lifestyle. All these beautiful luxury things we have around us, the elevators, and to be able to be picked up by an Uber or a car ride share, like for a short ride. It's like it's a gift and a curse these days.
Yeah, but I think there's good reasons for it. So again, I don't condemn and wouldn't condemn anybody for doing this. So if you think about the conditions under which humans evolved back on the African plains, 150, 200,000 years ago, this was a dangerous environment. It was a resource poor environment. It was a calorie poor environment. And you see the same kinds of patterns in people who are living in that environment still. They go out, typically the males will go out and do the hunt and the kill. The females typically will do the tuber and honey hunt. And when they gather all the food resources, they bring them back. And they sit around. And, you have this tension always, which I think we don't sufficiently understand individually, between our desire to get calories and our desire to conserve calories. You have those two things.
Right.
And what we've done, because we have these marvelous, amazing brains, is we've created a world in which calories are not difficult to get hold of now. You can go, I have a shop just across the way here. I can pop over there whenever I want. There's another shop just down the road. And, there's every variety of food from all over the planet available easily to me, including calories that are really easy to digest, like chocolate, and they're highly palatable. So we've solved in the modern world really the calorie provisioning problem. But the issue is bringing our calorie provisioning and our activity into balance. And for most people in the Western world, or maybe not most, but for very many people, we're consuming more calories than we're burning in terms of our daily expenditure, and we're consuming calories in a form that are really accessible. So I think, if you think, for example, you like donuts, what a wonderful food in a way. It's soft, it's sugary, a little bit salty, a little bit fat, and you can eat 4 or 5 donuts, and that's 2,000 calories suddenly. The average male only needs 2,500 calories per day. So you have this idea that it's only a small thing, and it's not really going to register, but unfortunately it does register, and it's in a readily digestible form. Now, if you contrast that with let's say a bowl of porridge oats, where the calories are relatively inaccessible, your body has to work to extract the calories and then digest and expel the fibers and all of the rest of it. Our bodies are designed to work to get calories out of the food we put in, but we love ultra processed foods. They're highly palatable. They're very, very yummy for all sorts of reasons, and they're something that encourages to eat them again and again. So our evolution, in terms of our metabolism, is fighting against us all the time. And the trick, I suppose, where that's concerned, is really to try and reduce the ultra processed foods as much as you can, and move towards a diet where your body has to work a bit harder to get the calories out of the food. So things like a high fiber diet, one that's high in fish oils, in olive oils, all those kinds of things. Think about what our ancestors would have had access to, and of course they would have had access to honey. They would have taken risks to get honey, to get fruit, and all of those kinds of things as well. But we've created this amazing world where our calories are available to us easily all the time.
It's true. It's a gift and a curse. You mentioned trophic factors. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about a brain-derived neurotrophic factor and what that does for creativity and mental strength and bandwidth, and how that really helps with brain performance and cognition.
Yeah. So brain-derived there's a bunch of trophic factors first. So these trophic factors are basically factors that are produced in the body by the body to stimulate or support the healthy functioning of a particular type of tissue or cell or organ. And there's nerve growth factor, for example, is an example of one. But one of the really central and key ones in the brain is one called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, BDNF, which is the short acronym for it, is produced by brain cells when they're active. It's not really produced by brain cells that are inactive. And there's loads and loads of ways of looking at BDNF, but happily it leaks out of the brain and it goes into the bloodstream, goes all over the body. So, for example, we did a study a few years ago with sedentary students where we brought them to the lab 3 times a week or 4 times a week, and they did a forced exercise regime on a bicycle. So we could measure how much activity they were engaging in, and you can measure oxygen and their breathing. And we also took bloods, and we also, with a little bit of a twist, we also did measures of memory function in these students.
Oh, cool.
And so what we found, and I'll talk about another related study in a moment, is that these students who were previously sedentary showed, after a few weeks of exercise, a nice big spike in BDNF in their blood. And they also showed, which was just fantastic, a spike in memory function as well. And that was sustained during the period for the period of exercise. Now, another study by Art Kramer and his colleagues in Chicago, published at much the same time, looked at the other end of the life course, people in their late 60s and early 70s. And what they did in this study was to take people who were sedentary, let's say you're 68, 69, 70, that kind of age, and you're not active or terribly active. They brought them to the lab and using an MRI measured the volume of the hippocampal formation. So this is a structure in the brain that's concerned with learning and memory. And they measured BDNF in the blood, and they did baseline measures of memory function. And then they took their population of 120 or 130 people. Half were just left to live their lives as they pleased, and they were just tested over the course of the following year. And the other half were brought out for a walk 3 times a week with a physiotherapist. And the exercise regime wasn't especially onerous. It was to do something like, if I recall correctly, about 1.5 miles or so a couple of times a week. Now, what did they find? They found the same result that we did, which is that memory function improved in the active, but not in the inactive group. But they also found, as we did, that brain-derived neurotrophic factors went up in the blood. And we know it leaks out from the brain into the blood and signals around the body as well. But what they also showed was that there was an increase in the volume of the hippocampal formation.
Wow.
So this brain area responds to regular physical activity. And we know from studies in humans and in animals that regular movement activates the hippocampal formation and does so at a rhythm that's known as theta rhythm. It pulses at about 7 times or 8 times a second, so 7 to 8 hertz. And that goes completely silent when you're not moving. So this regular physiological rhythm is there when you're active and you're moving about in the world, and is responsible for the production of this BDNF. And we could show that in ways we don't need to talk about here. But it's silent when you're not moving.
That is so interesting. Wow. I love that you have these 2 different studies that you reference as well. They both showed similar results.
Yeah, they push in the same direction. Now, you also talked about mood.
Yes.
So there's some wonderful literature coming out just in the last couple of years. I detailed some of it in my book, and some of it is so new that it's only appeared in the last year or two, showing that regular physical exercise is not alone something that helps relieve depression, something that prevents depression. It's also something that relieves major depressive disorder. So what do I mean by that? So I'll just talk about a couple of different studies. So there's a huge study was conducted by Samuel Harvey and his colleagues in Australia. And what they did was track 34,000 people over about an 11-year period. And in the average population, depending on the population you're looking at, between 2 and 4% of people will succumb to major depressive disorder in any year. And this is true across the planet. And what they did was measure exercise, they measure depression, they measure anxiety and all of these kinds of things in people. And then they measured the amount of exercise people were taking and looked at the probability that people were going to succumb to depression depending on the amount of exercise they were taking. And what they found was really remarkable, that about 12% of future cases of depression, will be prevented by people undertaking as little as 1 hour's exercise per week.
Per week?
Per
Wow.
week. So this is really, really small to get. Now, the effect is not huge. You're talking about 12% of cases. But we now know that there's a fantastic series of studies have been conducted in a variety of places over the last couple of years, showing that exercise in people who are suffering from major depressive disorder is about as effective as drug therapy or cognitive behavior therapy. And typically it's the case that in those people, they're not resistant to actually taking exercise if the therapist that they're working with is taking appropriate account of their willingness to engage in exercise. And there's a whole series of studies. The name I'd recommend your listeners to look up is Brendan Stubbs, Stubbs, who's been really a pioneer in this area over the last number of years. And what we're seeing, as I said, are these remarkable effects that exercise is a preventive for major depressive disorder, and the doses of exercise can be small. More is better, obviously, but also for people who have succumbed, taking up an exercise program is very effective at reducing the effects of major depressive disorder.
Wow, that is so interesting. Can you imagine? I mean, the fact that this works as well, maybe even better than medication and drugs. 12% reduction with just 1 hour of exercise per week. That's crazy. It's not even a lot of exercise. Now, I want to know why do you believe that is? I mean, we talked about the brain-derived neurotropic factor, but there are probably other factors like if they go to a gym, they can meet people and communicate and
Yeah.
have a community.
So
What other things are happening to help with this here?
Yeah, so there's lots of things going on. So first of all, just to be careful here, we're not giving medical advice, and if you're under treatment for depression, stick with that treatment. But what we do know is that exercise in people who are depressed and who are on medication, that typically augments the effect of their treatment. And similarly with cognitive behavior therapy, it seems to augment the treatment as well. But
Wow.
as I've said, consult your physician or your clinician in these cases. Now, what's going on? There's lots of things going on in people who are undertaking exercise. First of all, there's all of the metabolic changes that we've talked about. And there's a recent series of studies which talk about the idea that we should actually not be talking about major depressive disorder at all. That what we should be talking about is disorders, and that there are differing phenotypes in different people caused by different things. And a very important hypothesis is the so-called inflamed brain hypothesis. This is where you have lots and lots of inflammatory factors. These are molecules that cause inflammation, maybe subclinical inflammation in different parts of the body. Now, inflammatory signals are good. In the main, they tell you something's wrong and you need to seek treatment, or you need to rest, or you need to do something. But chronic inflammatory conditions are not good. And rheumatoid arthritis, for example, is a good example of a chronic inflammatory condition. Now, the inflamed brain hypothesis is the idea that you have a persistent low-level degree of inflammation. There are a variety of markers for this. One is called C-reactive protein, but there are lots of others. IL-6, IL-1, all the interleukins and things like this. And what we do know is that exercise moves those typically in a downward direction. So it may be, for example, in certain cases that what you're actually seeing is an anti-inflammatory effect of exercise, which is countering the pro-inflammatory effect that might be there for other reasons. And we also know, and you can show this very easily by getting people to participate in simple sedentary studies, that if you sit around for a couple of days, that boosts your pro-inflammatory signals in your bloodstream, and getting up and moving drops them. So at least there may be at least a single phenotype of depression, which is this inflammatory phenotype, which actually responds to exercise or to regular movement. Now,
what percent? Just real quick, sorry to cut you off. What percentage would you, if you can, predict of depression is this sort of phenotype, the inflamed brain?
I don't think we know is the honest answer. I think that there have been a couple of very large scale studies on this over the last couple of years, and it's a little bit of a moving target because what you're doing is kind of large scale epidemiology, and what you have to try and do is capture a blood profile a lipid profile, an inflammatory profile, and a psychiatric phenotype all at once.
Yeah,
So
a lot
that's
of moving parts.
a lot of moving parts. So that's a difficult thing to do. So I wouldn't want to put a number on it. But again, I'd come back to the more general point that all of the large scale studies show that have addressed this question, that getting out there and getting moving is a prophylactic for depression. It's a
Mm.
very, very good preventative measure for major depressive disorder. And quite a few studies, not all, but many show that it also reduces kind of anxiety and anxiety related disorders. Now, it depends. Now, anxiety comes in a wide variety of shapes and types. So, to my knowledge, it has little effect on social anxiety disorder, but I think kind of subclinical to clinical levels of generalized anxiety disorder seem to respond again to regular bouts of exercise. Now, why is this important? It's important because we know that a certain fraction, now the literature varies, or the guess in the literature varies depending on the study that you're looking at, of people who are suffering from generalized anxiety disorder convert to major depressive disorder in a year. I think 20% is a number that comes up quite a bit. So if you could choke off or damp down this anxiety response, you're stopping those people converting to depression,
Wow.
or at least that fraction of people who would convert.
Yeah.
So again, an unrealized or not very well known benefit of regular amounts of exercise. What we haven't talked about, of course, is exercise and dementia, but we'll maybe get into that at another point.
Yeah, I do have that on my notes here to get into. Before we get there, what does the research show in terms of fat loss and weight loss with walking in general, and is there a certain time that's best for that as well?
Yeah, so the literature is a bit variable on this. I opened the book on my book on walking with this case study of this chap who walks the Via Alpina, and in his case, his overall visceral fat fell, I think, by 30% or something of that order, and all the other kind of or his lipid factors or his lipid profile rather moved in the right direction. His LDL levels and all of the other things fell, but it's it a straight answer to this depends on what other things you're doing in your life. So if you're going for a walk, but you're getting in a few sneaky donuts from the local donut shop while you're out walking, you're probably losing some of the benefits. So I think giving a straight answer here is hard because you don't know what other things people are doing in terms of
It's
what
true.
they're doing with their diet. So let's put it like this. If you're walking and you're doing reasonable amounts of walking regularly, all other things being equal, in other words, you're not sneaking in the donut or you're not going for a couple of bars of chocolate or whatever, what you will find is that the trend will typically be downwards. Now, let me say, though, that there are lots of nuances to this. If you look at people who are living non-mechanized lifestyles, they're not just walking, they're walking and they're carrying stuff. They're carrying kids, they're carrying carcasses, they're carrying maybe wood for fires, or they're doing lots of other things. Whereas we Westerners will typically walk and not really carry much apart from our phones
True.
or anything else. So the degree of strain we're placing upon ourselves is probably quite a bit less than maybe they're placing upon themselves. So, we can all maybe remember walking around with a kid or something like that. And that's quite different from walking just, with your clothes on and your shoes on. So, the swings and roundabouts here is probably the best way to think about it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And so would it be beneficial to add variations like that? Maybe walk backwards or add weight, a vest or some sort of weight that you're holding in
Yeah,
your
so
hand?
I think those are all great ideas,
Okay.
and I've heard. I don't know what the literature really says on this, but there are people who claim that if you have problems with your knees, that
Walking
doing
backwards. Yeah.
backwards walking helps.
I
Now,
do it every day on my treadmill.
right, okay. So, what's your experience?
It's been helping me. My knees feel fine. I mean, that's just an N of one experience, but experiment. But
Yeah,
no, I do it. It feels good on my knees personally.
yeah. So, just on a slightly off tangent point on backwards walking, I remember I was taking a plane once, and I noticed one of the stewards or stewardesses uh, walked the length of the plane backwards without looking and pulling a trolley. That absolutely astonishing. So we did some studies on people walking blindfolded, backwards and forwards and things. And we had one participant in one of our studies who did this amazing walk backwards. She was in her late 60s or early 70s. And we discovered afterwards that she, in fact, had been a stewardess for years and
Oh
was well used to
wow.
walking backwards without any problem at all. So it is something you can do, and it's something that you can learn to do. And of course, we're very good at walking forwards with a blindfold. We can learn to do that very well, very quickly. And of course, people who've sensory loss, for example, through visual impairment, it can adjust pretty well under appropriate circumstances to that visual loss. So our ability to navigate is not something that's solely dependent on visual input.
That's really interesting. So if you're a flight attendant, you probably are really well versed at walking backwards.
Backwards, yeah.
We've been referencing your book, by the way. So your book is called "In Praise of Walking: A New Scientific Exploration," and we'll drop a link for anybody to get it. It's available on paperback and Audible. So whether you're a visual reader or an Audible listener, both are available. We'll put that link in the notes down below. Let's get into dementia. I know that it's
Yeah.
a big concern. I would love for you to share your thoughts on why we see this climb in these brain disorders, Parkinson's, but also dementia, and where does this conversation fit into that?
Yeah. So the best predictor that you're going to get dementia is old age. You know, there are subtle relationships between a particular gene, the ApoE4 gene, but there's quite a controversy in the literature about whether or not how direct the relationship between that gene and dementia are. However, let's just put the issue of genotype aside just for a moment. In the last couple of years, the Lancet is a very important medical journal, and they do what are called commissions on particular diseases every few years, where they commission people to survey the literature in its broadest sense and look at what's known about risk and preventive factors for particular types of diseases. And the first Lancet Commission on dementia reported in, I think, 2017, and the last one reported in 2022. And there are lots of interesting things to say, which I'll go through in a moment. But the central recommendation is increasing levels of physical activity in the population at large as one of the primary means for driving down dementia levels in later life. Now, there's lots of other things that they say. For example, screening for hearing loss in midlife turns out to be actually very important, and about 3% of dementia cases could be prevented with appropriate measures where hearing loss are concerned. They focus on diet, and there's a strong indication from the literature that eating a high fiber diet that's rich in high density lipoproteins like olive oil and reducing saturated fats is very, very important for cardiovascular and also for brain health. And there's lots of other things in their recommendations, but the core kind of recommendation is that about 40% of future dementia cases could be prevented by changing our lifestyles in a healthier, quote unquote, direction. And a key component of that is getting more activity into everyday life. There are other important recommendations. One of the key ones is the degree to which we're socially engaged. Typically, people can have the same degree of pathology in the brain, but one person who's very socially engaged will have less of a burden of that pathology compared to somebody who's not socially engaged. So
Wow.
being lonely is really important and something we need to worry about. And we also know that degree of education is also very important, that the longer you spend in education, the less likely you are to succumb to dementia in later life. So
And that education could be also like self-learning, just constant learning.
you need to be
Would you say that's
keeping
fair?
yourself cognitively active, but
Yeah.
years of formal education turns out to be a really, really good preventive measure. That if you spend 4 or 5 years in formal education, which will be rare in the West now, your chances of dementia in later life are much greater compared to somebody who's gone on to do a bachelor's or a master's or whatever.
Interesting.
So those are all, degree of cognitive engagement, degree of movement, kinds of diet that you typically have. All of those kinds of things all matter. But like I said, the kind of core point that they make is getting regular levels of physical activity into otherwise sedentary lives is a great method for reducing the future burden of dementia. And this is important because we at the moment, about 2/3 of dementia cases are of the Alzheimer type, and we don't have effective medications to treat them. There are, thankfully, a couple of drugs that have come on the market in just in the last year or two that appear effective, but they slow the progression probably by maybe up to a third over about a year to an 18-month period, which isn't great. You're better off if you can avoid it in
Absolutely.
the first place.
What's the difference between, I want to hear your explanation of the difference between being in ketosis, being fat adapted, and being keto adapted. Could you explain the 3 different processes here?
Yeah, so bad news is almost most people cannot get into ketosis using a high-fat diet initially because they have no metabolic flexibility. And here's the sad thing. Insulin, most of all of us know about insulin. Insulin rises when we eat sugars and proteins to usher sugar and proteins into primarily muscle cells. And when insulin rises, it literally is a salesperson that sells what we ate to the muscle cells. Now, insulin has no interest in fat as a food. Insulin would not rise when you and I eat a stick of butter.
Or your favorite olive oil.
Or my favorite olive oil. Insulin would not do a thing. The problem is most of us are insulin resistant and our cells no longer listen to insulin, so insulin keeps rising and rising. Now, when we've eaten enough and all of our cells are full, insulin then can no longer sell glucose and protein to muscles, but it's got a lot of extra calories, so it converts these into fat. And it turns on an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which converts these into fat, opens up the fat cells. Now, if you're trying to store fat, it would be a dumb idea to try and get fat out of fat stores because you're trying to put it in. So when insulin is up, when it's released, it blocks fat release from fat cells. It blocks another enzyme called hormone sensitive lipase. I wonder what hormone sensitive lipase is sensitive to. Insulin. So here's the gut check, if you will. Most of us have elevated insulin. So when we stop eating carbs and really diminish our proteins, one would hope that hormone sensitive lipase would fall and release fat from fat cells. Insulin prevents that. And you can actually show in humans that it can take 3 to 4 weeks minimum to actually liberate fat from fat cells on a ketogenic diet because insulin levels stay so high for so long.
So is that why, sorry to cut you off, but is that why if people don't follow your tips and you teach them how to prevent this problem in the book, but is that why so many people who just do high fat, low carb, it takes 3 to 4 weeks for them to enter ketosis? Is that what's happening?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's where, the Atkins blues come from, the keto flu comes from. And there's some really cool human studies that I didn't include in the book. We cut lots of stuff because I get boring. It's so nerdy. But there's some really cool studies looking at low carb ketogenic diets in humans and looking at energy expenditure, basal metabolic rate, versus a standard carbohydrate diet. And what happens in these studies when they bother to measure it is it takes 3 to 4 weeks minimum to begin to see an increase in basal metabolic rate in the ketogenic diet folks. And you never see that in the carbohydrate groups. And this shows in ketogenic studies. And the basal metabolic rate doesn't go up until you start producing ketones. And the reason the basal metabolic rate goes up is because you're uncoupling mitochondria. And so you're actually burning oxygen without producing ATP. So your BMR goes up.
Interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. And we're going to share some ways for you to not have to wait 3 to 4 weeks. You talk about that in your book. And you also have a story of your patient, Miranda, who went through the same problem, what we're talking about here. Before we get to that and the Mito Club, we'll transition to in a second. Okay, I want to really understand. So if somebody's metabolically inflexible, and you said it doesn't really matter in terms of both can be efficient. Glucose and ketones, one is not cleaner than the other, according to you. But what about the studies that show ketones lower free radicals, reactive oxygen species? Like, I don't see some studies showing that in the case of glucose, but I see some studies showing that with ketones. Wouldn't that help make it a cleaner fuel, or is there something else going on that I'm missing here?
Yeah, you're missing the fact that ketones work by uncoupling mitochondria.
Okay, so it's going right back to that.
And when mitochondria are uncoupling, they don't produce as many free radicals and reactive oxygen species because they're blowing off the pressure.
So
boom.
Does glucose uncouple proteins, mitochondria? Excuse me.
No, not at all.
So with that, if ketones are uncoupling mitochondria, then it would be a cleaner source?
No, it'll be a less damaging source. There's a difference.
There's a difference.
Yeah, they protect mitochondria from damage, and that's the whole idea of uncoupling mitochondria, and that's what Martin Brand proved. That the benefit was not that they're a clean burning fuel, but they prevent the damage that would normally occur from burning glucose. Does that help?
I got it. So what would be a good analogy for that? I mean, you're the king of analogies. So how would you explain that for, is something coming to mind, an analogy you would use for that process?
Well, I use the example of a pressure cooker, but one of the
what I'm saying is glucose versus ketones.
Yeah, so ketones were generated, quite frankly, for two purposes. You and I, and most of your listeners, know that they were generated to be an alternative fuel source for the brain. Because when glucose ran out, free fatty acids cannot get into the brain. They technically can, but they're so big and slow that the brain, which is a fuel hog, can't get enough of them. But these short chain water soluble fats can get into the brain. But number two, if things are really bad, if you're literally starving to death, then ketones start telling the mitochondria, whoa, things are really bad here. We can't just rely on this as a fuel. We've got to protect ourselves, from damage, and we got to make more of ourselves. And that's where you really start saying, holy cow, I got it wrong. Most of us got it wrong. This has been known about. Believe it or not, uncoupling proteins have been known since 1978. That's when they were first described. But we just haven't. Some people describe me as flying at 30,000 feet, and I can kind of see things. I don't know, but that's been my life's work. I disrupted heart surgery, and I disrupted healthy eating with the plant paradox. So
Yes.
don't get me wrong. Ketones are great, folks. Everybody listening, I have nothing against ketones. I love ketones, but I think people have called me the father of the carnivore diet, and I'm not sure I want that title, but well, I guess I'll take it. So, yeah, don't get me wrong. Ketones are really good, but why they're really good is for a reason that I think we should all embrace and understand that there are other ways to get the same effect without doing what we call a ketogenic diet.
Understood. And
can I add one more thing, which is a good segue?
Of course.
Okay, so hopefully everybody knows the ketogenic diet came about to treat childhood epilepsy, and it started in 1930 at the Mayo Clinic. And this was an 80% fat diet, 10% carbohydrate, 10% protein, classic ketogenic diet. And the kids actually did remarkably well. But as any parent knows, kids love carbohydrates, and it's a very hard diet to stick with. As so many keto dieters know, it's really hard to lose that carb hunger. In fact, it really never goes away, as I show in the book from research at the University of Sydney. So the ketogenic diet for kids fell off when pharmaceuticals came along, like Dilantin and Phenobarb. Yeah. But it actually had a very interesting resurgence in the 80s and 90s when it was found that MCT oil, which is medium chain triglycerides, if you put kids on an MCT oil-based diet with only about 50% of their calories coming from fat, they would get the same benefit as the full-blown ketogenic diet, but they could have a whole lot more carbohydrates and a whole lot more protein. And they became incredibly compliant. In fact, I recently have a 17-year-old high schooler with horrible seizure disorder on 4 meds. And he was so drugged up, he actually really couldn't go to high school. I put him on my program with MCT oil and our other tricks, some of which we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. The guy's now off of his drugs. He's actually playing soccer for his team. And I mean, it's just, I hate to use the word miracle, but his mother certainly describes it as a miracle. And so this is one of the things you'll notice in all my books, my ketogenic diet. First thing I say is, okay, we're going to get you on MCT oil, and we're going to get the benefit of MCTs. And so is that a good segue to where we're going next?
Yeah, I want to get into the Mito Club, and the reason why MCTs work so well, as you know and explain, they have the ability to really bypass digestion and effectively go right into the mitochondria, and especially caprylic acid is one of the most well-researched ones when it comes to ketones. So we'll talk about some of your favorite MCT sources, and I love that I saw that list because it's actually what I've been promoting. But let's talk about the Mito Club, because for those who don't understand the electric transport chain and how the metabolism works, you gave such an amazing analogy that you came up with that you put in the book called the Mito Club. So unpack that and explain what that means.
All right. So mitochondria, the electron transport chain in mitochondria, there's, I describe it as the hippest, hottest club that every Gen Zer and millennial wants to get in.
We'll call it Live Miami. That's the most popular one here. Live Miami.
Perfect. Live Miami is a great example, and Miami is a perfect example for this. You want to go clubbing. Why do you want to go clubbing? Well, quite frankly, the purpose of clubbing is to couple, right? You want to couple with somebody. That's what you want to do. Pitbull, it's all he wants to do is couple. So the Mito Club has one entrance, and it's guarded by a doorman, and there's a velvet rope. And there's only one exit out of the Mito Club. And it turns out in the Mito Club, I mean, there's hormones, there's drinks, there's the energy is seething. It's crowded. People are trying to get to the bar. People are bumping into each other. And we're actually doing this in our mitochondria. We are actually energizing electrons and protons to a fever pitch, trying to get these guys to go through the Mito Club, and hopefully, if everything works out okay, a proton and electron are going to couple, and they're going to exit the back door of the Mito Club. And it's actually a revolving door. And this is true. This is actually a revolving door at the end of the mitochondria. And as they push through this mitochondria, they generate ATP. So there's only one way in and one way out. And it's steamy and hot. And the problem is there's, in a way, a lot more, we'll call them, for the purpose of this, we'll call them girls, which we'll call electrons, and we'll call protons boys. And yes, protons can couple with protons, and we won't go there. and electrons can couple. But electrons will also couple with oxygen. And it's a bad match. Everybody knows they shouldn't do it, but these are the reactive oxygen species and the free radicals. And they're trouble, and fights break out with all of this. And there's bouncers in the club. And it turns out we only have 2 bouncers in mitochondria, 2 antioxidants. And that's a surprise to most people. The big surprise is one of them is melatonin, the quote sleep hormone. And we'll get into melatonin maybe.
Yeah.
The other
I love talking about melatonin. Yeah, for sure.
The other is glutathione. So those are the only 2 antioxidants in mitochondria, and they're there to kind of, keep peace. But what happens is that things get so rowdy that the club is no place to be anymore. Everybody knows there's fistfights breaking up. The club is dirty. There's no time to clean up. And so a lot of people get frustrated, the protons, the guys, and they're not coupling. So they go, oh, screw this. I'm going to go to the club down the street. So they push open emergency exits in the club. And these are actually the trap doors that uncoupling proteins control. And they escape from the club and they go down the street and look for other clubs. And so that's actually the pop-off valve for all of this. The other thing I point out is that the club needs to be cleaned up every night after closing. And you need a considerable time to clean up the mess. I mean, there's beer on the floor, there's broken bottles, there's, tables are broken. Who knows what's spread on the couches? As Club 54 used to have. Club 54 used to have vinyl on all the couches up in the balconies.
Wow.
Because they could flush it off every night. Don't get me started. Before your time. So anyhow, there's a method to cleaning all this up, and there has to be a downtime. And what happens is, if, let's say, the club is open from 10 o'clock at night till 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, you got from 4 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock the next night to clean up. But now management says, man, the club is so successful. We ought to open at noon and we'll close at 6. Well, now instead of like 18 hours to clean up, now we only have 6 hours to clean up. And things get messy. Now, it turns into this juke joint where nobody wants to go. So all of these things have to happen to keep the club the happening place it is. And popping off these emergency exits is actually one of the keys that keeps the mitochondria and the club the place to be.
And it is the uncoupling.
It's the uncoupling. It's the opening up of these, if you will, emergency exits. And there's actually 5 emergency exits in every mitochondria. And they're all controlled by what are called uncoupling proteins. And so once you go, holy cow, what are these guys doing there? And then you start looking at the effect that opening up these emergency exits have on mitochondrial health and general health. And then you start looking at, well, okay, we know ketones do this. We know ketones would have done this every night for a few hours. How can we let's stay on the ketone subject. How can we continue to get the benefit of ketones? And that's where the work by 𝙈𝙊𝙍𝙍𝙀 from the NIH, I think, really starts putting pieces together.
Now, if you want to learn more about nutrition's role as it relates to mitochondrial health or dysfunction, click the video on the screen for the 7 worst foods for your health and mitochondria. Next, we have industrialized seed oils, also called vegetable oils, also called linoleic acid. I'm going to give you a list of the 9 oils you want to avoid and safer alternatives.